My girlfriend and I have a problem. We don't have a good place to put our shoes. And if I was looking for some yellow belly, easy way out of this, I'd buy a shoe rack on Amazon for $12. But I'm not, so I'm going to build one. I chose red oak for this, not because I have good taste or make sophisticated choices, but because this is the only hardwood my Home Depot sells besides poplar, and poplar's kinda gross. I started with two 12-inch wide boards that I had specifically for this project. I drew out the basic plan after measuring the height of some of our shoes and tried to get most of the measurements down so that I would have a rough idea of what to cut. This shoe rack will be about 26 inches in height, with 3 shelves spaced 7 inches apart from each other. 7 inches was the height of the tallest boot that I wear, so that's what I went with. There will be a similar space below the bottom shelf with the addition of some leveling feet that can add a bit more height if needed, as well as stopping the thing from rattling around on the floor. The width will be about 38 inches, which fits well in our current porch and should be wide enough for 4 pairs of shoes per shelf. I built this workbench based on a video by HomePro Hero. I built it way shittier than he did, but it's a cool design and it is really helpful to get the miter saw out of the way when it's not being used, especially for a smaller space like mine. This board shown on the left here will be used for the 2 upright sides of the rack, while the board on the right will be cut into the 3 shelves. Spoiler alert, this isn't going to be enough wood for the 3 shelves, and my costs have already vastly exceeded $12, but this is still way more fun. I filmed this at the beginning of this winter when it was starting to get cold and dark very early, so a lot of these shots are not the best thing to watch. I also still trusted my camera's autofocus, which was a grave mistake. I assure you there is not much to miss here. I did mess up with this cut and took a splinter off of one of the cutoff pieces. I used a little DeWalt pull saw to remove that. After realizing that my initial cuts were a little less than square, as well as picking up another board to finish off my shelves, I decided to cut some of the corresponding pieces together at the same time. My thought was that at least this way the lengths would all be identical and hopefully anything slightly less than perfectly square wouldn't be too much of an issue. Before this, however, I decided to try and deal with the cupping that had occurred in almost every board. This is apparently expected because they have been sitting in my garage for a while up until this point, but I don't have a planer and I wasn't really willing to lose any thickness anyway, so I decided to try a trick with an iron that I saw online. Unfortunately, this didn't work at all, but I decided that a shoe rack doesn't really have to be perfect, so I just carried on. Once everything was evened up and cut together, I need to get going on the pocket holes. I saw another cool trick online to mark the exact center of a board with a speed square, and this time the trick actually worked. Once I did that, I copied the line onto the other 2 shelves and marked a couple more spots about 2 inches from the end of each board on both sides. As you can see from this shot, the boards are all still very cupped, as promised. I decided to sand everything before assembly. This is an obvious choice in this case, especially with such a simple project. First, I'll draw a pencil onto the entire sanding surface so I can track my progress, and this is essential in my opinion. Then I clamped all 5 boards together and aligned the face in question, and I handled all of the edges this way. This gives me a bigger surface to sand, which helps to keep the sander at the right angle and also ends up with every board being a bit more uniform in relation to each other. I used a couple of dumbbells to keep things from moving around too much. For the larger faces of the boards, I followed the same process using pencil to keep track of where I was at, and I sanded using 60 grit, 120 grit, and finally 220 grit sheets. As you can see by this time lapse, this took quite a while. For an aesthetic touch, I chose to add some small chamfers to most of the front-facing edges. This also serves the purpose of dulling some of the corners that will be in harm's way the most, because apparently even a slight chamfer or roundover will be much more resistant to dents and damage than a sharp corner will be. I got this benchtop router table from Grizzly, and I haven't used it too much yet, but it's really come in handy for repeatable tasks like this. At this point, I should mention that due to the non-flat nature of my boards, the chamfers came out pretty uneven in some spots, which also could have been mitigated with better technique when routing them, but I really don't care. However, this is another good reason to hone my ability to make boards flat in the first place. It's hard to see here, but I did use the small miter gauge that came with the router table to route these smallest corners, and it worked like a charm. Assembling this was about as easy as it gets, though for me that still isn't easy enough sometimes. I flipped the top shelf upside down on top of a scrap piece of the same red oak I used so that there would be about a 3/4 inch lip on that shelf once the sides were attached. Then I used a weight to hold each side piece in place while I secured those with the pocket screws, which I had already done off camera before this clip. Then I clamped some 7-inch spacers to the sides to set the right distance between the shelves, and I finished it up with the screws. Now it's time to finish the piece. Before that, I'm just hand sanding the chamfers with some 220 grit. Next, I'll wipe down the entire surface with a tack cloth to remove any remaining dust, and then apply mineral spirits to the entire surface as well. This will clean the wood and prepare it for the finish. Finishing for this was a bit of a hassle and something that I'm pretty terrible at generally. The weather was getting quite cold by this time, so I started with Danish oil, which seemed to have a better chance at curing in the cold than polyurethane did. This went on without much difficulty, just following the instructions on the can. I applied 2 coats. Then I decided that we have pretty wet winters here in Chicago, and I should probably make this thing at least slightly more water resistant, so I decided to add some wipe-on polyurethane on top. This is a proposed method on the Danish oil can, and I had read about others doing this, so I figured it would be fine. Most internet woodworkers' concern with wipe-on poly is that the coats are so thin that you need to apply 2 to 3 times as many or even more than that to reach the same level of film buildup as you can get with just a few coats of a traditional polyurethane. Most internet woodworkers' concern with the wipe-on poly is that the coats are so thin that you need to apply 2 to 3 times as many or even more than that to reach the same level of film buildup as you can get with just a few coats of a traditional polyurethane. Regardless, it was getting cold, as I had mentioned, and not only was the Danish oil more viscous than I anticipated, the wipe-on poly certainly didn't seem as thin as those people online had mentioned. I thinned the coats with a bit of mineral spirits, and I believe I managed 2 coats before just giving up. I think it's still good enough for a shoe rack. Once the poly dried, I used some crumpled up paper grocery bag to buff it out. I've seen this recommended quite a bit on YouTube, and it does seem to work to smooth out the finish and give it a nice satin shine, but I will likely go with some sort of buffing attachment for my drill, or even a buffing pad on my sander next time. I would just prefer to have something stronger and more uniform. The one caveat I'll mention here is that I probably didn't wait nearly long enough for the finish to dry before buffing it, and it was still a little gummy. But I'm not perfect. The moral of the story here is to either have a heated place to do your woodworking, or just finish things in the summer. It still turned out just fine. For a reference, on the day that I applied the Danish oil, the high temperature was 32 degrees Fahrenheit with a low of 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and the polyurethane was done 5 days later with a high of 55 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Most people will tell you that 32 degrees Fahrenheit is simply too cold for a finish to dry, and 55 degrees Fahrenheit is about the lowest temperature anyone will recommend you to try to apply a poly finish in. Moving on. None of the floors in our house seem to be very flat, so I've become very fond of these leveling feet. I found some threaded inserts and some feet on Amazon, and I used a dowel jig from Harbor Freight to drill some centered holes for these to go into. Before installing the threaded inserts, I wiped a little bit of poly onto the bottom of the sides, which were the only unfinished section at this point. My hope was to seal them just enough to keep them from absorbing or letting go of a significantly different amount of moisture than the rest of the shoe rack. While installing these threaded inserts, I was a bit aggressive and I did create very small cracks near 2 of them. They're very hard to see on video, but I tried to film them just to show here. All that's left to do now is to bring this thing inside and load it up with all our shoes. Check the description for any and all links that I will post there, and if you like this, I'd appreciate you subscribing. Thanks for watching. Speaking of links, I did make some Amazon affiliate links for all of the tools and other materials like those leveling feet that I used in this video. If you purchase through these links, I'll earn a small amount of money to support this channel at no extra cost to you. Last but not least, the song playing in the background of this video is one I made specially for the video because I make music as well. The song is vaguely related to shoes in honor of the video, and you can listen to it on Spotify or any other streaming service, as well as check out my music YouTube channel by clicking below. Thanks again for watching.